to this very exciting conversation with Elizabeth Joyce, the woman who is trying to buy Letterboxd. While that headline may sound like a lot, this conversation is going to dig into why Elizabeth is actually the perfect person to buy Letterboxd and why all of us should be backing her and actually join her endeavor. So let me just start out, Elizabeth, by introducing you. So you are you've worked in film, but your backstory is really interesting. Tell us about who you are, what have you been doing up until this moment to really tee up why you are in, trying to do this crazy big thing.
Yes. So thank you so much. And also apologies for our computers challenges before. So I am first and foremost a social entrepreneur and an academic and a screenwriter. And so I came to this process having gone to NYU as an undergrad to study film and human rights policy, having pursued the human rights policy piece as my career, and going through 15 years of working for NGOs, nonprofits, academia, studying alternative business models, and being a social entrepreneur. And through that process, developed this alternative business model that my team and I are using at Intrinsic, which we originally developed for our platform Community Center, which is a collaborative marketing platform for film that we spent the last year working on in partnership with Harvard Law School and Boston College Law School on the entity structure and how we have a public benefit corporation that serves the people, and also with Cactus Lab, the development team behind Letterboxd, on the actual platform itself and the engineering. And so for the past year, we worked with those two groups preparing our platform, Community Center, which we've talked about on, Film Stack and talked with lots of members of the community about. And then when this news story broke on April 26th, that Tiny, the private equity company that owns 60% of Letterboxd, was selling their share, we realized really quickly that everything that we had done, everything that we had built, all of this work that we had gone into it would actually scale right up to allow us to implement the same model for Letterboxd. So the way that I personally came to that is having spent all of this time as a researcher and a social entrepreneur. So doing the academic research on business models and looking at data and looking at outcomes of studies and conducting experiments on what sort of business models enable the company to do more than just focus on maximizing return to shareholders. And that's something that I know you and I have talked about a lot before,
Yeah.
maybe is of interest.
Yeah. Okay. So let's back up a little bit.
Yeah.
So you have worked in human rights.
Yep.
Uh, you have a background in business. In fact, you ran a company up until the pandemic. So talk to everyone a little bit about your experience out in the world, being really a social entrepreneur,
Yeah.
and what that taught you about how business really works.
Yeah, thank you for that. I spent 7 years running a company, a public benefit corporation from 2013 to 2020. And in that time, dealt with all of the issues that sort of brought me to designing this specific model, which is that all companies, regardless of whether they have a huge social mission or really no social mission at all, need startup capital to launch, to develop their products, to build their products, to launch, to develop a community, to pay salaries, to pay legal fees, all of those things that, aren't particularly exciting to think about, but are the reality of running a business. And so in doing that, most companies need to get equity investment from somewhere. And the traditional corporation structure, from a legal perspective, from a corporate perspective, the legal requirement for any corporation is that they focus on maximizing return to shareholders. And if you don't do that, your shareholders can sue you. And that happens all the time, actually, right? Like that is a common thing.
Okay. So basically, I know you started one of the first public benefit corporations in Massachusetts
Yeah.
and you built a yoga product.
Yeah.
And so before we get into all the film stuff, I think it's really interesting for us filmmakers to understand like how business works, not even the entertainment business, just business in general.
Yeah.
And when you were telling me about building a public benefit corporation, I think like explain the distinction between what a corporation is and a public benefit corporation and how working in a public benefit corporation building your yoga product, which is so different from a movie, actually really tees up a lot of the issues that are at play with film and letterbox and all of that. So just like take a minute to talk to me about your experience running a business that is legally responsible for just making money for its shareholders.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So, the two entity forms that people are really familiar with are just regular corporations and nonprofit organizations. So, nonprofit organizations, people know they have a social mission, you make a donation, but there's no ownership, there's no profit, there's no return to investors. The way that you fund a nonprofit is through grants and donations from people for which they are signing up and saying, I'm never getting any return on this money. I'm just committing to the mission. The flip side of that is the corporate model, which is that people invest money as equity investors, and they're doing that with the expectation of some kind of return on investment. And so when you start a business, you make a pitch deck and you take it around and you say, we're going to give you a 20% return on your investment or a 15% return, or if you are very optimistic, a 50% return, right? Any of those things. And that's what investors are looking for, is to understand, why is that opportunity going to earn them more money on their investment than investing in someone else's company or the stock market in general, et cetera. And the standard legal structure for corporations requires the company to make decisions through the lens of maximizing return to shareholders. So, for example, if your employees come to you and they say, we think we're underpaid, we want to form a union, we've seen over and over again with lots of companies that they go to extreme lengths, union busting efforts, right? All kinds of things to ensure that the employees don't unionize, that they're not required to pay higher wages, right? This is at issue with strikes and all kinds of things that are familiar to people across sectors. That companies' legal responsibility, and it doesn't matter what they do, all publicly traded companies, all privately held companies, if they're a standard corporation, their job is to maximize return to their shareholders. And so in this particular case, what's really interesting about the public benefit corporation model is that the public benefit corporation model is an entity structure that allows you to do both. And it allows you, legally speaking, to prioritize your social mission as well as profitability. And you can prioritize your social mission first, and you can still then pursue profitability, but it isn't your guiding light in the same way. Your social mission can be your guiding light, and then within that, you figure out how to make the business profitable, but not from an extractive perspective, from an equitable perspective.
So that really comes into play with the film world because ultimately all the companies that exist in it, their legal goal is to enrich their shareholders. It's not just for the love of the work.
Yeah.
But the public benefit corporation is this new legal entity where you can say to your investors that your goal is not just to make money for them, but is to have a public good. And in this case, filmmaking. So you ran your yoga company in this model and then you had sort of a change in career.
Yeah,
So talk to me about that.
sure. So in 2020, March 2020, I was 8.5 months pregnant, and I had run my public benefit corporation for 7 years. And I had gone through so many investor meetings at that point, because at the end of the day, you do need outside capital unless you are personally wealthy and able to fund it. You do need outside capital to grow. And I had met with hundreds of investors at that point, pitching this idea that if we do the right thing for the right reasons, they will make a return, but that their first commitment has to be to doing the right thing for the right reasons. And having done that, the question that came up over and over again is, okay, but what's my exit strategy? And an exit strategy in business is the point at which they get a return on their investment. So if I start a company and you give me, $1 million, and then you've invested it and we've built the company and we're profitable, now you want to know, what's the mechanism by which you get your money back? How do you actually realize that profit? And so for lots of standard corporations, and for really, I think it's fair to say most, if not all, venture backed or private equity backed corporations, they're optimizing for an exit to a private equity firm or potentially to an IPO, an initial public offering. That's how the early investors get their money back. And the stories that we hear about things like, the early investors in Facebook or the early investors in LinkedIn or PayPal or Netflix or any of those, how they become exceptionally wealthy is because they exit, right? They sell their shares that they bought cheaply at the beginning, they sell them at a higher price later. And so the challenge with a public benefit corporation or any sort of social mission driven organization is that if you're not optimizing for a return to private equity, right? And if you want to sell to a private equity firm, you have to be focused on that profit from the beginning to make that happen. If you're not doing that, then you need to offer your investors a different exit strategy. And so the exit strategy that I developed was because of that 7-year process, right? And those meetings and running the business that I ran, and talking to investors who some of them were mission driven, but they still needed to understand how would they eventually exit at some amount of profit, even if it wasn't huge. And so that's where we developed, in this time, equity crowdfunding became a legal structure. Prior to 2016, you could only run campaigns like Seed and Spark, like Kickstarter, like Indiegogo, or any of the other the non-equity crowdfunding campaigns that exist. The SEC passed different standards and regulations. In 2016, it passed Congress. The SEC approved this different type of crowdfunding campaign that allows for equity crowdfunding. And what that means is that now the members of the public can buy shares in a private company. Just like, on the stock market, any person can buy a few shares of Apple or a few shares of Google or something like that. But before this, unaccredited investors could not do that with privately held companies. What equity crowdfunding allows, the regulation from the SEC is that unaccredited investors can make small investments. The SEC's minimum investment is $100, so it's not $5, but it's $100 because of the SEC rule. And what that allows you to do is to let people invest in your company, who wouldn't ordinarily have the opportunity to invest in private companies. And so through that process, through that 7-year period of running my business, and in that time, equity crowdfunding came online, I recognized what they were doing and the potential of it. And it was really being pitched at the beginning as a great way to get startup capital for a new business. But because of the experience that I was having, I thought, you know what, it's actually a great exit strategy. It's actually a great exit mechanism if you bring on mission-driven investors who believe in something, who want to see it exist for social reasons, and then you build the product, you build the service, you build the company, you build your community, and people join you. Those people then have a vested interest in the future of that company. And they actually want to buy in and become part owners. And there are some famous examples of this in different ways that have different types of structures. The Green Bay Packers is one that people are often familiar with, where the team, the NFL owners were going to move it to a different city. So instead they raised money by selling memberships to the community and, this version of it. Our version is different than theirs, but it's that concept, right? It's that
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, all of this really tees up you coming into the film space and seeing all the ways in which filmmakers are suffering and audiences are suffering
yeah,
because of the way that film distribution is set up right now and the monopoly of the big streaming platforms and major studios. So, in 2020, when you decided to close your business and to pivot more into filmmaking, um, talk to me about like, as you were coming into this area, what were the problems you saw? And what were the things that you felt like, given your experience building public benefit corporations, you could really bring to bear? And I just want to say that the way that Elizabeth and I met was actually via Substack because she wrote a post about how she had a project where she was trying to solve some of the problems that filmmakers face. And so I DM'd her and I'm like, okay, what are you doing? I want to know. And so that's how we met. And that what she was doing was actually not buying Letterboxd. That actually comes later. So tell me about that idea that you told me about when we first spoke a few months ago and how it really ties into all of these larger business concepts.
yes. So in 2020, where March 2020, I'm 8.5 months pregnant. I'm really done with the business today. I just was ready to move on in life. So I decided to close that, have my daughter in April 2020. And I was teaching, I was an adjunct professor and started doing that and deciding what I was going to do next. And in that time, I decided to sort of go back to my first love of screenwriting, and I started writing scripts. Through that process, because the pandemic happened, because things moved online, I had the opportunity, even though I was in Boston rather than New York or LA, it gave me the opportunity to join webinars and join Zooms and write and do and participate in a different way and figure out if there was a viable road forward for somebody outside of New York or LA. And in that time, I started I wrote some scripts. I entered into some competitions. I got some exciting placements. And I traveled to a film festival in New York where I met one of my co-founders, Finnerty Steves. And we started talking about what was going on in the industry, what we faced on each of our trajectories and and the observations that we had about the problems in the industry. And I started realizing that all of that experience that I had was actually super relevant. I didn't realize that my interests in like film and economics would intersect at some point, but they realized that actually it was as relevant, if not more relevant than it was, just in entrepreneurship generally. So at that point, Finnerty and I started talking about how we would pursue this, right? How would we pursue it as a production company? How would we pursue it as a screenwriter, as a director, as producers, right? And realizing that we could utilize this same model, this public benefit corporation model, but we could utilize it to solve the problems that we could both see in the film industry.
And talk to me about I heard you say before that 99% of independent films fail. And, obviously we can quibble about the exact number, but I think we can all agree that it's really, really hard for independent films and filmmakers to make it out there. And there's a lot of different theories about why that is. But what is your take? What do you think is the biggest problem facing filmmakers today that you think there's a solve for?
Yeah, and I think, that quote, I think that came from the an earlier webinar in which I think that, someone said the statistic about the 99% failing. And I think from my perspective too, something that I just want to add on that is the idea of failure. I think is, instead of saying fail, that we should say like, don't recoup investment, right? Rather than fail, because there's so many ways to succeed beyond just those financial metrics. With that said, on the financial side, if you want to get a film funded and you want to have equity investors, they want to know, what is your business plan for making that money back? And so within that, one of the major problems that I saw was looking at the difference, looking at production budgets and then the marketing spend as a percentage of those production budgets. I think one of the common examples that lots of people have heard, because the filmmakers and Neon both talked about it, was Sean Baker making a Nora for $6 million and then Neon spending $18 million to market it. And that sort of a markup is obviously unattainable to the majority of filmmakers. And so looking at the cost, like, why is the cost that high? And I think that a large part of why the cost is that high is the attention economy that lots of people talk about, and the idea that audiences are fragmented. It's not that the demand has gone away, it's that audiences have become fragmented in the world in which there's infinite stuff to watch in infinite places. And how do you actually, everybody can put a film on YouTube, but how do you get anybody to know that it's there and watch it? And so the reason, I think that one of the many reasons that marketing costs have gone up so exorbitantly is because if we are, as independent filmmakers in particular, if we're particularly dependent on social media and we have to spend a lot of money. So if we just look at like Meta platforms as an example, and we can say that, we can make targeted ads on Meta, and we can, pay to promote our trailer, or pay to promote posts or posters, anything that we want. But at the end of the day, we don't have a lot of insight into who is Meta actually serving those sponsored posts to, in terms of, are they actually our target audience? Are they engaged film fans? Are they even real people? Are they bots, right? Like, those are the kinds of questions that we face. And so the challenge there is that all of the social media platforms are these sort of either like initially venture backed, and that are, most of them are now public. Substack is still private, but um, is on a certain trajectory and is venture funded. All of those things, that to the degree that any social media platform has this legal and funding structure, we can predict right now what they're all going to do, which is they're all going to pursue profit to maximize return to their shareholders. And there's a specific process, the process that Cory Doctorow coined in shitification, right, is specifically a description of this process, which is that a company, people want to start a company, they take money. Do you want to say, they take money, and that in that process, they're optimized from the beginning. They are optimizing for maximizing return to those shareholders rather than the community.
So basically, when it comes to independent film, um, what you're saying is, as we're all trying to get people to watch our films, and the means to do that in this moment is really through social media. The amount of money we're spending is, maybe $18 million is a lot in the film world, but for a campaign for Nike or American Airlines or Skims is very, very small. Um, it's incredibly hard, if not impossible, to really have a successful marketing campaign on social media because we don't have enough money to do it. And then, because most films are not things that, you know, 300 million people are interested in, it's much, much smaller numbers. The number of hits on those ads and on those posts don't really help Facebook or TikTok hit their goals in terms of shareholder return. So it's a misalignment
Yeah.
between the goals of films and filmmakers and the platforms that they're using that they think will enable their success. So, really, like your diagnosis, which I think is really interesting, is that essentially the reason why independent films aren't doing well is because there isn't really a mechanism for them to find audience and to build recognition in order to get watched. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a great description. And I would say that the problem in one sentence is that, we don't own the means of marketing.
Right.
Right. We don't own the means of marketing. So every time Instagram changes an algorithm or Substack changes an algorithm, any of those things, we're all kind of scrambling to figure out how do we game the algorithm and have visibility. And we spend an inordinate amount of time posting stuff on Substack and trying to just become visible to the people who might be our audience. And so that's what, is really interesting. I know we're gonna go back to Letterboxd after, but that's what.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, yeah. But in terms of like, I mean, to start talking about Letterbox, that's why essentially for you as a social entrepreneur trying to fix what's wrong with film, Letterbox is really our best bet because it is a social platform or a community online community that has millions of people who actively watch film. um, if that were to become like a corporation whose number one goal is shareholder return, they'll turn into something like Facebook or Instagram, which would then mean that the films that we all make aren't going to ever rise to that level of being profitable for those companies.
Right.
So, so basically, what I've understood from you and that I want you to explain is that basically, if a for-profit company buys Letterbox, the future of film is essentially sunk. But if a company buys Letterbox, whose goal is to promote films and get people to watch them, then we all have a chance at a career in this.
I would love to be able to say then everything's perfect. I want to make sure that but I mean, in reality, it does come
So
back.
why Letterbox?
Yeah,
Why does Letterbox matter?
yeah.
What's the difference between Letterbox and the other platforms out there? Like, just explain that for us.
Yeah, sure. So one thing to say is that right now, right, Tiny, a private equity company, owns 60% of Letterboxd, but those were the first investors in. Prior to that, the founders started Letterboxd in 2011, and it wasn't until 2023 that they took any outside capital. So they had this huge runway in which they were able to build a product and service that was based on their own values. They took on this equity partner in 2023 that to everyone's credit has not made a lot of changes, right? Has not forced these kinds of changes, has allowed the founders to keep doing what they were doing before. The challenge now is that, as I described before, this idea of all investors, even impact investors, if they're making an equity investment, want to understand what their exit is, and because eventually that's how you make back money, right? Unless you're just making a donation, that's how you make money. And so right now, Tiny is exiting their investment in Letterboxd to make a profit on what they invested. And so they're looking for a new owner. And so the challenge is that whoever the new owner is going to have an inordinate impact on the future of independent film. And I'll explain that in a minute. But this idea that there is a moment of opportunity right now, it's a small window, right? It's a small window because Tiny is looking to sell. And there are, the press has reported that there are lots of buyers. Um,
Yeah, like I'll just say, there's a lot of rumored buyers out there, but one of them is a Comcast subsidy. What's it called?
I've
Versant?
read Versant is what I've read in the press. Yep.
Versant. Right. Yeah. So that's been reported. So essentially, you and your team at Intrinsic Entertainment are throwing your hats in the ring to buy Letterbox in this public benefit corporation model that aligns with the values of films and growing audience versus like a subsidiary of Comcast.
Yeah.
So, not that I don't think you can do it, but explain to us
Yeah. Yeah.
why you can, because
Well,
it's
we're
actually a
hard.
pretty interesting argument.
Yeah, it's a lofty goal, but I think the thing to come back to is that really everything of value in, not to be grandiose, but like everything of value in the history of the world has started out as a goal that a lot of people said that's not possible, right? So everything good starts from that place. And the reason that we are so committed to this is going back to this work that we've done on entity. I know it doesn't, like, it's not glamorous to keep going back to entity structurization and like legal structure and bylaws and articles. It's not glamorous, and a lot of people sort of start to nod off. But at the end of the day, that's actually it's where all the power lies, right? Because this idea of aligning the type of your corporation. So if we think about corporate structure as being like a machine, and that machine can be a wood chipper or it can be a watering can, right? Like you can think about which one of those do you want to build? And if you build a wood chipper, it's going to chip wood. And if you build a watering can, it's going to water your crops. And so all of this stuff, right? The legal structure, the bylaws, all of those things, every single corporate entity, whether that's a private equity firm or a strategic investor, that's a subsidiary of another company, of a publicly traded company, they're going to come into this with money from investors. Those investors are going to be demanding the highest possible return on their investment financially. So, what that means is that those investors actually own the company, and the legal structure says that regardless of what anybody thinks, that they have to maximize return to their shareholders. So that's what they're going to try to do. They're going to try to keep wages down. They're going to try to, buy their resources as cheaply as possible, all of those things. The difference with a public benefit corporation is that we have the legal right to prioritize social mission, to bring on impact investors who believe in the mission first and think it will be wonderful if they make a profit of some type, right? But that's not their primary motivation. They're doing it because they believe in the mission and they want it to be profitable, but in a regenerative sense, not an extractive sense. And the problem that we have solved at Intrinsic with our partnership with WeFunder is that we offer those impact investors an exit mechanism to the community. And that allows us to optimize our products and services for the community that we're building so that that community can then buy in at smaller dollar values as the owners of the company over time. And that is how you provide an exit to the investor.
Yeah, but I mean, just to dig into this a little more, like,
Please.
talk to me a little bit more about like the nuts and bolts of like your offer to Letterbox and how you've been able to come up with what's needed
Yeah.
in order to really be a player at that table as you try to buy this potentially very valuable online community.
Yeah, sure. So again, like let's pretend for a second that we were a private equity firm and what we would do, right? So all the big private equity firms, it's not sort of one or two people putting in money. They're going out and they're getting thousands of investors to pool their money into a fund, and then they use that fund under the name, I'll just use the name like Sequoia because it's a big firm. It has nothing to do with anything here other than just it's a big company. Sequoia is not one or two people putting in money. It's thousands and thousands of people putting in money, right? To create a huge fund that then gets deployed under one company's name, Sequoia. And so that's what we hear when we think about Sequoia as investing, or any other group, any other VC or private equity firm. It's thousands of people who are working together under a banner. And so we're doing the same thing, but with a social mission, which is that we are bringing together institutional investors who focus, who have so who prior, institutional impact investors who understand the social mission and support what we do. We're bringing in individual angel investors who also support the mission. We're bringing in donors because we have a fiscal sponsor that allows us, we have a fiscal sponsor through Inspire Access. And what that means is that if somebody wants to make $100,000 tax deductible donation, they're not going to get any equity in the company. It's just a donation. Here you go. They can do that through our fiscal sponsor. That's another mechanism for participating. So we're bringing together institutional impact investors, individual angel impact investors, donors who are coming through our fiscal sponsor, lenders, and then what we're building towards. And the reason that we launched the way that we did in asking our community to help us just with the legal fees to get this off the ground.
Well,
Just
yeah, but I think like we can come back to that in a sec. But I think like what I'm trying to get you to explain
yeah.
is like, okay, the owners of Letterboxd get to decide who buys it. So,
The,
what is your pitch?
yeah.
Like beyond like because if you have a company that is essentially like can write a check for any amount if they want it
Yeah.
versus you who obviously does not have like unlimited cash, why would they choose you if you're I'm assuming you would be offering less than like a Sequoia type company.
Yeah, so
Like
that's interesting. So that's an interesting question, and I thank you for like directing me to it because it's an assumption that makes sense at face value, but when you dig a little bit deeper, the answer is that we actually can put together a competitive bid because we're forming a coalition in exactly the same way that the private equity companies are forming a coalition. The only difference is the motivation of the people who join the coalition. So on the private equity side, the motivation of the people who join the coalition is we think that this is a valuable asset that we're going to monetize and we're going to raise prices and we're going to sell everyone's data and we're going to do XYZ, all the standard enshittification processes, right? That's what any of them could choose to do. And our coalition are people who are mission driven first. And what's interesting about this opportunity is that there are people involved who are here for multiple reasons. Some of them are people who strictly care about the future of independent film. Some of them have never really thought that much about film before, but care very much about economic models and care very much about business models because entrepreneurship is one of the key drivers of, economic well-being for the middle class and working class, that there are also investors who really that's what brings them to our coalition. So we have a broad coalition that can put together a bid that will be competitive. And the reason it will be competitive is because any of these private equity firms, they're using math, right? They're not just saying, well, we know a guy who has $100 million, so here's $100 million. They have mathematical equations that they're using to calculate how much are they going to pay for Letterboxd or any other asset? What do they think the value of that asset is worth? What is the future revenue of that asset going to be? How are we going to get that revenue?
right. But
Yeah.
also ultimately the difference between you and a traditional equity investor is the legal responsibility of an equity investor is to return a profit to its shareholders.
Right.
Whereas you, because you're a public benefit corporation, you are not legally bound to do that. You are legally bound to pursue the mission that you put in your articles of incorporation, which are, I mean, you should say exactly what they are.
Yeah.
But I think that's like really a key difference here
But I
is
want
that,
one second
yeah,
because I just want to clarify one thing to make sure.
yeah,
So it is really important to say that it's not that we don't care about profit. We just care about mission first and then profit. So we are still pursuing. Letterboxd is already a profitable company, right? That's why Tiny bought it, and that's why they want to sell it at a further profit. Everybody can deduce that from the publicly available information. The argument here is, what I was saying before is the idea that a private equity company can call a bunch of rich people and put together a bid for $1 billion. But if the reason those investors are coming to the table is because they want to know that they're going to get that they're going to 10x their investment, then
Mhm.
what that demands is that the company present them a plan that says, here's how we're going to 10x our revenue, right? That's how you provide that return. And the difference between, so like any private equity company can put together $1 billion in cash and say, we'll pay you $1 billion. But if those shareholders are coming to that coalition because they want them to maximize the return on their investment, they have to then maximize the return on investment, which means they actually can't overpay for the asset. It means that their number, even though they have billions of dollars, it doesn't mean they're allowed to spend billions of dollars because it has to be tied to the actual math of what they think of what their proposal is to do with the company. And that's the difference with a public benefit corporation is that, yes, we want it to be profitable. We absolutely want it to be profitable, even because profit is good for the economy. And I say this as a proud social justice warrior. I say it as a proud social justice warrior, right? We need companies to make money. We just need those companies to also recognize that they should uphold the social contract and they shouldn't have a scorched earth version of how they make money. They should have a regenerative version of how they make money. And that's what we have.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, I think that's, like, a very interesting key difference, and, one of the big concerns that you see, on Reddit about the letterbox sale is who's gonna buy it and what are they gonna do with it.
Mhm.
And you've already mentioned the idea of enshittification, but I think, like, that really gets at, like, what are the stakes of who buys Letterbox? And also, we haven't really talked exactly, like, what Letterbox is and what it does, and I feel like most of us know that, but just for, like, background, can you explain, like, how Letterbox works and what the community it cares so much about, and, like, what a buyer who is not a public benefit corporation could potentially do towards this fear of enshittification? Because I think that that also really helps to explain, like, why this what the stakes are for the sale.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So when Letterboxd started, it started as a social discovery site for films, right? And the founders describe themselves as cinephiles and, genuinely love film and love independent film and all of those things. And you can see that reflected in the choices that they made, for the 12 years or 12 years that they were building it from when they started to when they brought on Tiny as their first partner. And so it started out as a place where film fans could could create a diary, could log the films that they've watched, could review those films, could star those films, could give ratings, could make lists of films that they wanted to watch, lists of films that they have watched that fit a certain, whether it's genre or theme or interest or whatever it was that they had. So it started out as a place online for people to talk about films that they wanted to watch, had watched, loved, etc. And that has it has evolved into also being a place where studios, distributors might pay to advertise a film. So a specific example of that with Letterboxd was the Parasite campaign. So they went right to Letterboxd for the Parasite campaign and have publicly credited that marketing strategy as being the driver of their success and why they had such a good return on investment. Because unlike what we talked about before, the idea that, you can market on Instagram, but like who's actually seeing, what accounts are actually being served your ad? And even if they like it, is it converting to anything? Are they buying a ticket? Are they sharing it? Or are they just seeing it and liking it and continuing their scroll? So that's the difference with Letterboxd, right? So it has evolved. So it started out with the diary and logging and reviewing and discovering films. And then there was the advertising component where, you could look at additional things. They've added features like, so they have for the individual film fan, patron and pro accounts where you can start looking at your own statistics and watch habits and see, so at the end of the year, there's the trend of people saying, I watched this many hours of film, this many films this year, and this many hours in this genre. And, people write funny things like they discovered that they've seen films like that, 70% of their films starred Willem Dafoe, and they didn't do that intentionally, but they just discovered it, right? Those kinds of things.
But also, like, just to point out, they don't use algorithms. They're not sort of boosting certain films. There's no sort of behind the scenes mechanics that prioritize certain posts over others,
Yeah.
which is like such a key differentiator of the site. And obviously, like the way that these sites make money is the more engagement, people going to them that leads to more revenue.
Yeah.
So as the users are worried about who's going to buy it, explain how easy it would be for someone to really monetize the site and the whole inshitification
Yeah.
um
So if I were,
concern.
yeah, exactly. If I were a private equity company, right? If I were a private equity company buying Letterboxd and my whole mandate was to maximize return to my shareholders, then what I would do would be probably should. They know this already, so I'm not telling them anything they don't know. They already know it. But what I would do, right, is I would go in and I would start using algorithms to tweak uh, what you find. So like right now, if you go on Letterboxd, you're going to see what you are watching and the people that you've chosen to follow are watching, right? Based on lists that you followed or people that you've just, found that you have stuff in common with. What you could end up doing, right, is deciding that when you could start a whole recommendation system that is essentially pay to play so that instead of surfacing, the types of films that you want to watch based on your expressed taste, based on the films that you've watched before, the people you follow, the lists that you've made, all of that, right? That now you start only seeing the kinds of things. So like when I sign into Instagram right now, I see all these sponsored ads from the things that it has decided I want based on who's paying them to advertise, right? So like I don't spend very much time on Instagram anymore because I don't even see my friends' posts. I'm actually just seeing sponsored stuff. So that's essentially the description of one potential outcome. And the difference in owning it, right, as a public benefit corporation and not having that pressure to maximize return. Again, it doesn't mean you don't have a profit. It just means that you don't have the pressure to maximize it. I think the really important thing to understand about when you look at the history of what Letterboxd has chosen to do, for example, they added the video store component last November, I think it was. And in doing that, one of the interesting, statistics that I saw reported in the press was that films that films that were on Video Store then experienced an 8x engagement with Letterboxd, right? In terms of people watching it, adding it to lists, writing reviews, but that their undiscovered gems category, which are films that have not actually gotten distribution deals, so films that maybe had success at festivals or however they came to the platform, but they didn't have distribution deals yet, then experienced a 40x engagement increase. And they've even had distribution deals come as a result of being on the unreleased gems shelf for a period of time. So this is the moment where the future of Letterboxd, who owns it and what their corporate structure is actually going to determine the kinds of things like that happen. Does the future of Letterboxd involve supporting intent, doing what the founders have historically seemed to do, which is specifically and intentionally supporting independent film? Or does it go in the direction of pay to play, where the space and the discovery and the algorithm is just sold to the highest bidder?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is like a really good explanation of what the stakes are and really feed back to your initial diagnosis of why the independent film industry is faltering so much is because of the cost and difficulties around marketing a film.
Yeah.
And I have to say, like, I'm saying independent film, but, you know, having a film on Netflix or Hulu, it doesn't actually mean that your film will get the kind of marketing that we're talking about. Because one of the, oftentimes filmmakers will say, "Oh, my film did really well. It really should be on Netflix. Why isn't Netflix buying it? Like it won all these awards, like it's getting good reviews." But ultimately, even when you have a film on one of those platforms, they're not going to necessarily market your individual title. And the goal of those platforms isn't even to get a lot of views for one film. The point of those platforms is to get more paid subscribers to that platform. And so example of Letterboxd, another way that it really stands out is that it's about individual films being able to find their audience and promote themselves, because there isn't really any other way to do that, including if you get distribution from a major streamer. And that to me is like a really important piece of this conversation is like, how can films have impact again? How can films drive the cultural conversation? It seems like we're talking more about films no one's ever going to see
Yeah.
than we are about films that are out there. Just with the news about the Sam Altman biopic, I feel like that whole scenario sort of echoes what you're trying to do, where Amazon has dropped the film. And now, there's this whole conversation of like, who's going to want to touch it, because all of the major studios are so intertwined with the business of AI. And it really shows the importance of there still being independent channels for film marketing, film distribution that are not reliant on these larger corporate entities whose number one goal is shareholder return, which of course then ladders up to censorship and political sensibilities and making whoever happy is happy. That's one of the big reasons why I also want to say transparently that I support what Elizabeth is doing. And I am actually a strategic advisor on the documentary side, because I really see this whole endeavor as something that could potentially really change the game for us, instead of it being another shot in the heart.
That's
um
his head. And that is like you really nailed it right there in terms of the idea of like, what does it mean to have continued consolidation on the media side and to have the same group of venture capital and private equity investors invested as primary or even minority owners in all the same companies, when it's the same group of people providing the money across the table, then you wind up in a situation of censorship, as you just said. And so, it doesn't, you can insert name here, you can Mad Libs it with whatever firm you want to talk about. What it comes down to is, what kind of a machine did they build? Did they build a wood chipper, or did they build a watering system? And that's what this really comes down to. And as far as Letterboxd is concerned, I think that the reason that I was drawn to it initially, the reason that I reached out to them when we wanted to build a community center was because I saw that historical track record of what they had done. And the way that I understood it, as an outsider, was here's a group that is actually interested in independent film that could choose to make even more money than they're making, but they've actually left to their own devices, they have chosen to continue to promote independent film. And, I have there are tons of ways that I think by having a partnership with a coalition of people from the industry, from independent film, from impact investment, who really care about the future of it, that I think there is infinite runway for actually what we can do in terms of shoring up the ecosystem here, because there are opportunities for, and you just said impact campaign. One of the things, left to my own devices, and that's an important point to clarify, I think, too, because I've been asked this before. I've been asked by people like, so are you saying that you're going to be the CEO of Letterboxd? No, I'm not going to be the CEO of Letterboxd. I work at Intrinsic, and our hope is that the team at Letterboxd stays in place and is given the added benefit of a group of advisors, coalition partners from the industry who care about the industry, who have the mission first and profit second, and that together we can move the whole thing forward in the direction that benefits everyone, and that we are able to do things like the types of films that have impact campaigns, to even create a new space on Letterboxd for impact campaigns specifically, right? Because not every film is going to have an impact campaign, but if we have a specific area that says, like, here's the area of this platform where you can engage with additional materials, whether it's on the documentary side, if it's educational materials, if it's supplementary interviews, right? All of the extra things that can actually be part of this and help people discover new independent films.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the discoverability should be the number one priority of everyone working to save film. Like, if films can't be found, then what's the point of even making them? But I think we should wrap up soon, but also we didn't actually get into community center. So when I had first seen Elizabeth posting on Substack and I reached out to her to find out what she was up to, it was actually before all this Letterboxd stuff. And you were building this new platform for filmmakers that not only would help them to raise money, but to start building an audience from the beginning, and to launch their films. So just quickly, give us a summary of Community Center. And and just to understand, so Intrinsic Entertainment is sort of the overall company. And part of that is Community Center, which is happening no matter what happens with the sale, which is its own great endeavor. And then if Letterbox is purchased, then it would be like another company under this umbrella, right?
Exactly, a subsidiary. So, Community Center is a collaborative marketing platform. And what that means is that if we think about Netflix as a parallel and say what Netflix has done, their business model is they have amassed a huge audience in one place. And that audience dips in and out. Not every person watches the same films. People watch all different films. But because they have amassed an audience in one place, the films that they choose to put on the platform get viewed by some segment of that audience. So utilizing that same idea, right? The idea that a challenge for independent, so like Netflix, Hulu, Disney, all of those companies that have streaming platforms that have amassed an audience, they're benefiting from economies of scale. That means that from a marketing perspective, it is much cheaper for them, even though they have more money, right? It's much cheaper for them to say, hey, Kathleen, there's a new documentary we think you'll like. Here it is, right? It's very cheap for them to do that. Whereas for an individual filmmaker, it's incredibly expensive. As we talked about before, the idea that, if you're dependent upon advertising on social media and, whatever other channels are available to you based on your specific film, it's much more expensive, right? It's much more expensive to do that. And so the the thing that we're building with Community Center is a place where we're amassing an audience of filmmakers people who support filmmakers and fans, and allowing them to discover these films while they're in development, while they're in production at a much earlier stage, and engage with that in different ways. It can be on the financial side. It can be on a donation side. It can be in the sense of, we're donating a production office to you. You don't have to, we're giving you a production office for free. It can be coming to different events that you have that are around thematic issues for your film. So if you're a documentary and, if you're a doc that is going to be coming out and it's talking about a specific legislative issue, you might hold an in-person event in your community that isn't necessarily a screening. It's before you've even finished your film, but you're hosting an event that you're bringing people together that care about specific issues that are then going to carry that forward for your film when it's ready to come out. So it's really about audience building and collaborative marketing, and saying that if I have an audience that cares about my social impact issues and you have an audience that cares about your social impact issues, if we just let them know about each other, right? Not everyone will love every single film and become an evangelist for every single film, but this is how you create economies of scale, is you bring people together who care about things that overlap. And that's what we're doing, and excited to go, that we will be pursuing regardless of what happens to Letterboxd. And I say that I fully intend we're going to buy Letterboxd. And I'm not saying that from a delusional place. I'm saying it from a mathematical, legal entity structure place. Our coalition is going to win this. And that's complicated, right? There's a lot of stuff that has to happen behind the scenes. There's the public stuff and the back behind the scenes stuff. But that this is the opportunity that we have to determine the biggest asset that we could have collectively in independent film.
And also, I should say that when I first spoke to you about what you were doing, one of your partners is Cactus Lab, which is owned by the owners of Letterboxd, which I think also, to me at least, gives more credibility because it's the owner of Letterboxd to make the decision and they're already part of Community Center. And I guess one of the things with Community Center that I just want you to just explain is it's basically a platform that's giving the filmmakers the tools that they need to do the community screening, to aggregate that audience, right? It's not a social network. It's not a place where people necessarily will go and watch the films. It's more about giving the infrastructure, right?
Right. It's like a hub, right? So it's a hub
Mm-hmm.
so for example, right, there are amazing companies like Kinema, as an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's providing distribution already. That's an incredible place for filmmakers to go and distribute their film. So we view that as we're not going to create, that aspect of our business. We're using this collaborative model, and that's why we're called a collaborative, right? Because the model that we're putting forward is that there are lots of businesses to have a film and to take your film from development to production to distribution to success. You need more than one company. You need lots of companies along the way. And that can be a crowdfunding company, it can be a distribution company, it can be marketing, right? But that what you really also need is a hub that enables you to make sure that the audience you build on your crowdfunding site comes with you to your distribution platform, and that the people who care about the thematic issues of your film also know, okay, here's where an event is happening or here's where a screening is happening, and are able to come with you through that whole process. And the purpose of doing this as a collaborative is that this is, instead of people who built communities on Facebook a decade ago or 15 years ago, have seen the value of those communities basically decimated because of the direction that Facebook has gone from a financial perspective and the choices that they've made. So what we're doing is trying to create that hub that enables all of the wonderful film businesses that exist to collaborate to bring our efforts together and to make sure that we're amassing an audience in the way that Netflix and Disney amass an audience, but that we're using it to benefit all the filmmakers instead of just the shareholders.
Sounds great. Sign me up. Um, I okay, so I hear a lot of very incredible ambitions and goals and high stakes, but there's actually something that we can all do right now that will directly help support this endeavor that Elizabeth is taking on. Talk to me about you have a well, I'll set it up.
Yeah.
You have a crowdfunding campaign
Yeah.
and you're trying to raise $100,000. Forget this, drum roll, please. Legal fees, which
The most,
some people might be like, that's
yeah,
not cool.
it's
But
not
you know what I have to
cool.
say to all of you watching, as someone who's had to raise money before, legal fees are real. One of the most important things in building a film is lawyers or building a business because everyone you work with, every transaction, there's a legal backbone to that. And well, I'll let you chime in here, but I just want to say I fully support and I think it's super important that everyone support paying for the legal fees for this.
Thank you. You're right. It's not exciting, right? It's not anytime you're fundraising, whether it's for film or a business or anything, if you're raising for film, people want to know that the money they're giving you is going to go on screen, right? Is going to be on the screen. Nobody wants to hear like, well, we're going to use your money to pay for catering and legal fees, right? That nobody wants to hear that. And the issue here at play is that as we have discussed in this, we are going toe to toe with private equity, venture capital, strategic investors who have literal billions of dollars, who have legal teams that can spend an infinite amount of time and money making sure that they structure the deal in a way that they'll win. So that's who we're competing with. And we have the good fortune of having spent the past year we have a head start because we spent the past year doing our legal structuring with Harvard Law School, with Boston College Law School, and ensuring that we already have the structure that we need as intrinsic to be a public benefit corporation, to give our investors an exit to the community. We have all of that in place. But doing a deal, making a bid, making an offer, doing due diligence, and even coming up with investor documents is actually super expensive. So part of our model where we want to be able to run a WeFunder campaign where we enable filmmakers to become equity owners and not just donors. But we actually can't do that until we have all of these legal documents in place. You have to have investor documents, you have to have disclosures, you have to do due diligence. There's so much legal work that goes into it before you can even launch a campaign. And that's what we're asking for the community's help with. And we totally recognize that it's not exciting, right? It doesn't sound exciting, but it is the same idea. To go back to the gardening metaphor, like putting the manure in the field is not the most glamorous job, and it doesn't sound that cool, and it's kind of gross. And if you don't do it, you don't get the crops that you want. So,
Yes.
yeah.
And I just want to say, I want everyone to normalize raising money for legal fees because when you're raising money for a film, the last thing investors want to hear about is that you need money to pay your lawyer. They want to hear about your impact campaign or the amazing access you have. But you can't actually do anything until you've paid your lawyers.
Yep.
So for all of you that support film or are thinking about supporting this endeavor, feel really, really good about paying these lawyers.
And it
Because if you set things up right in the beginning, it also saves you money in the end. So,
saves you a
as
lot.
not, yeah. And so the link I'll post when I post this, I'll post the link. But if you just Google Seed and Spark
Buy
Letterboxd, it will come up. and I did give in full transparency to support this effort. And so yeah, I just really applaud everything you're doing. I know there's some people, I don't know if anyone has any questions from the audience out there, but is there anything else you want to say? I have like one final thought I want you to give, but is anyone in the chat? Any questions or?
And I'd love to make one more short point just in terms of
Yeah,
people have said, well, why don't you just ask the investors to pay the legal fees? And
yeah.
that's a really important question to answer. One, like it's not how deals get done, right? Like the person,
No, you can't do that.
if you have an investor who's interested in investing in your business or your film and you say, hey, could you actually also pay my legal fees? That's not how it works. And two, even if you did do that and then they pay for it, you are actually paying their attorney to produce legal documents that benefit them, right? That are not actually neutral documents. That's why in any transaction, both sides have attorneys, both sides have representation. And so you actually need to be able to pay for independent representation that, like, shout out to the lawyers. They are the ones who make deals happen or not happen. And so that's the thought behind that. So thank you.
So, as a sort of final thought,
Yeah.
the fight against enshittification, you've spoken really well about like the stakes for Letterboxd and on social networks, just everything that a platform does really being about profit. But there's really more at stake here than just certain people are going to make a lot of money and that's that. Talk to me about sort of the role of enshittification in our culture and in our politics.
The enshittification of society. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so what that comes back to, right? I think that a lot of people, regardless of where any individual person sits on the political spectrum, right? Regardless of where you sit, I think that most of us can agree that people with a lot of money, wherever they sit on the political spectrum, people with a lot of money have a disproportionate amount of power in politics, in policy, in the decisions that get made, right? Who runs for office, who succeeds in running, all of those things. And that in our society, since the advent of tech companies, of venture capital, of private equity, of all of these instruments for building and funding businesses, wealth has been redistributed from the many to the few, right? That we have a situation where wealth has been concentrated in the hands of a few people. The economy right now for the average working class or middle class person is terrible. For the very, very wealthy, they're doing phenomenally. They have more money than they've ever had. If you look at the statistics about how much the wealth of individual tech entrepreneurs has grown, whether that's Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or any of those guys, right? Their wealth has grown by orders of magnitude at the same time that ours has decreased. And the challenge there, in terms of thinking through the idea of the enshittification of society, is that those business models, right? Anyone who wants to start a new company, whether it's a tech company, a film company, or or a local restaurant, needs startup capital for that company. And if they're going to take startup capital, they need to give their investors an exit mechanism. And so the model that we have designed, while it solves this problem for independent filmmakers, which is our community, it also can solve the same problem for other tech companies that don't have to be film based, right? It goes beyond what we're doing. It doesn't mean it's like what we're doing is incredibly important to our own community. And it is what we want to see happen because we think it's very important that we recognize as a society that economic justice and economic vitality are mutually dependent, right? They're not mutually exclusive. They're not at odds with each other. We need to do both. We need companies that are profitable, that make money, and also do it in a regenerative way, not in an extractive way. And so that's what, when we talk about the enshittification of society and how it goes even beyond this model, the reason that we're so passionate, my whole team, right? I have a team of 8 unbelievable women and 16 strategic advisors and growing, right? That we have this incredible group of people and institutional partners that are moving towards this goal because we recognize that what it can do for independent film, it can do for other industries also, and can move in this direction of distributing wealth in a way that's equitable to workers, to users, right? To all of the people and to investors. It's not saying that we don't want investors. It's saying we want investors and we have an exit mechanism that works for you and works for the community.
Yeah, I think it's so fabulous to bring all these ideas full circle. Like, this isn't just about saving film. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's really been a joy getting to know you and your brilliance. And I'm super supportive of all the work you're doing. And I'm so happy to be, like I said, a strategic advisor. So, everyone who has more questions, you can reach out to Elizabeth via Substack, post comments. We're going to keep this conversation going and keep talking about this sale as it evolves and what it means. So, thank you all so much. Have a lovely day. Taylor Lewis, let's freaking go. Yes, let's do it. All
Thank you
right.
so
Thanks,
much.
everybody.
Thank you
Bye.
so much.